The morning was quiet in the way deep winter mornings often are, when the air seems made of stillness rather than wind, and the world appears to be holding itself in a long, unbroken breath. At the foot of a low hill where stones had long ago heaved themselves out of frozen soil and settled into crooked shapes like the roots of some ancient buried tree, a weasel slipped through a gap no wider than a hand, its small body fitting perfectly into the cold, dark hollows between rock. Its fur was white with the winter season, clean and soft, and perfectly matched to the snow that spread across the ground in uneven layers. Only the dark tip of its tail betrayed it against the pale landscape, a single small mark of motion in an otherwise unbroken field of white. The stones beneath which it traveled were old, older than the farmhouse beyond the pasture, older than the fence that once marked property from wilderness, older than the idea of any boundary at all. Lichen coated their cold surfaces, crusted and gray-green, dormant now under frost. The weasel moved with no hurry, its steps quick but not restless, each motion quiet and precise, as though it were not so much traveling as simply flowing through the shapes the earth already provided. Above the stones, snow lay gathered in soft drifts that curved around their angles, shaped not by footsteps but by wind, long past. The sky was pale, the kind of pale that gave no hint of sun, only a faint glow that seemed to settle into the snow rather than shine upon it. The air smelled of cold stone and dry grass and nothing else. No birds called, no branches creaked. The world was not empty. It was simply at rest, untouched by urgency. The weasel paused at the edge of a narrow tunnel between the stones and lifted its head, whiskers twitching, sensing rather than searching. Beneath the snow, beneath the frozen stems of grass, beneath layers of earth locked rigid by winter's grip, there were lives moving, mice in burrows, voles in damp nests, rabbits in sheltered thickets. But none of them stirred close enough now to matter. The weasel did not hunger sharply. Not yet. Winter had taught it how to carry hunger like a small, quiet companion, something always present, but not always speaking. It slipped forward again, its body almost liquid in the way it shaped itself to the narrow spaces between stone and root. Above, the field stretched wide and pale, untouched by footprints, unmarked by travel. The farmhouse in the distance was silent, smoke rising only faintly from the chimney, a mere suggestion of warmth contained behind walls unseen. Even the pasture fence stood quiet, its wood roughened and gray with age, leaning but not fallen, part of the landscape rather than marking it. The world did not notice the weasel's passing, not because the world was indifferent, but because the weasel moved in a way that did not disturb the world at all. It was simply another thread woven into the deep, slow fabric of winter, and winter itself offered no acknowledgement. It did not shift its light or stir its wind or change its cold to mark the weasel's presence. The snow remained white, the air remained still, and the field remained open and silent. The weasel slipped further into the stone roots, its body leaving no trace on the snow. It moved because movement was living, and living was quiet, and nothing more was required. The day continued with the same soft absence of urgency, the same pale light that seemed to drift through the air, rather than fall from the sky. The weasel moved out from beneath the stones and into the open snow for only a few steps, its small prints appearing in a neat line, before disappearing again beneath another low arch of rock. It moved as though the field and the hill and the stones had been shaped exactly to its size, as though winter itself had made space for it without being asked. The ground was firm, the snow thin in some places and deeper in others, settling into dips and folds of the earth, where old roots pushed up just beneath the surface. Dry grass, flattened by months of cold, lay in pale strands that stirred only when the slightest breeze passed. The weasel's fur, white against white, made it nearly invisible unless one looked directly at it, and even then it seemed to flicker rather than appear. Here, then gone, then here again, without drama or urgency. It stopped once near a depression in the snow, a shallow place where the ground dipped toward a cluster of dormant brambles. The air there held the faint scent of vole, a scent that rested in the weasel's memory, like a map of where the world had moved earlier in the day. But the scent was old. The vole had traveled through that place when the light was still young, and now it was somewhere deeper, warm in its nest of matted grass and fur. The weasel did not chase memory. It listened instead to what the present offered. The silence of the field told it everything it needed to know, that nothing was moving near enough to matter, that the time for quick motion had not yet come. So it continued along the stones, its body slipping into the shadows, and then the light, and then the shadows again, like something half made of the land itself. The sky stayed pale, refusing to darken or brighten. Time seemed to stretch flat across the pasture, without direction, only presence. The weasel felt the cold in a way that was familiar, a cold that did not harm but shaped the day's pace. Slow, deliberate, without waste. Hunger stirred and quieted, without rising into urgency. Far across the field, a single branch of a distant willow clattered softly as the breeze shifted direction. A crow, perched high in that tree, ruffled its feathers once, then settled back into stillness. No flight, no call. The sound passed through the world without disturbing anything. The farmhouse beyond the pasture remained unseen, though its presence could be sensed in the faint thread of smoke that continued to rise into the air, straight and unbroken. Nothing moved on the road. No gate opened. No footsteps crossed snow. The day held itself in a pause that felt endless but was not heavy. It simply was. The weasel slipped once more between the stone roots, disappearing into the dark space beneath the frozen earth. There, the cold changed in quality. Less sharp, more dense, the way air feels in a place that has not been touched in a long time. The stones were cool to the nose, cool to the whiskers, cool to the pads of its small feet. Old leaves lay pressed flat against the ground, brittle but not crumbling, preserved by frost. A thin thread of water could be heard somewhere far down in the ground, moving slowly between rocks, a sound so faint it was less heard than felt, as a vibration through the pause. The weasel stopped and rested, body curled loosely, breath even, eyes half closed but alert. It was not sleep. It was the kind of rest that animals take when they belong to winter. Rest that is poised, rest that is simply the absence of movement, rather than the withdrawal from the world. Outside, the field remained quiet, untouched. Winter took no notice of the weasel's presence, and the weasel, in turn, asked nothing from winter except space to exist. The afternoon did not arrive so much as gradually form itself out of the pale, unchanging light that had been present since morning. No line marked the shift. It simply happened in the way that wintertime unfolds, softly, without insistence. The weasel moved again, though not far, slipping from the narrow dark beneath the stones into the thin air of the open ground. Its body flowed over the snow in a low, clean motion, the kind shaped not by thought, but by the quiet memory of muscle and instinct. The snow here was firmer, pressed smooth by long cold, and unbroken by travel. The weasel paused, nose lifted, whiskers alert, listening to the faint thread of sound beneath the surface. There, the vibration of something small moving through tunnels of grass and earth, subtle, muffled. A vole, perhaps, or a small field mouse. Not close, not within immediate reach. The weasel stood still and did nothing but notice. It did not tense, did not stalk. Hunger remained steady and contained. A familiar presence carried without urgency. The cold air tasted of lichen, of stone, of the quiet, untouched places where winter stores its silence. A thin breeze slipped over the top of the hill and settled into the hollows, brushing the weasel's fur lightly. The sky overhead was the same pale gray it had been all morning, but now there was a faint dimming at its edges, a gentle closing that signaled the approach of evening, though no sun had been seen clearly all day. Time moved like breath, expanding, settling, expanding again, without direction. The stones at the base of the hill held the cold deeply, their surfaces coated with a fine layer of frost that caught the light in small, scattered glints. The weasel knew the crevices and channels between them not as paths, but as natural continuations of its body's shape. It slipped into one of these again, moving without hesitation, without slowing, as though the stones and the weasel had been made in conversation with each other. The darkness beneath them was not complete. Thin shards of light filtered through cracks where roots and earth had shifted. The ground here held the smell of winter sleep, damp soil, old leaves, the faint, almost hidden sweetness of dried grasses preserved under snow. The weasel paused again, not to rest, but because there was no reason to move further. Movement in winter is not constant. It is a measured thread, drawn only when necessary. It curled itself loosely against the curve of a stone and listened. The sound of the vole beneath the snow had gone still. The cow in the pasture, somewhere beyond the rise of the land, shifted once, its heavy weight pressing into the ground with the slow certainty of something that has lived many seasons. A crow, perched high in a bare tree along the edge of the field, ruffled its feathers once, then stopped. The world did not speak. It did not need to. The weasel blinked slowly, its breaths quiet, its presence nearly invisible. Hunger drifted through it again, not sharp, not calling for action, simply reminding the body of its shape. But winter teaches patience more deeply than need. So the weasel did nothing. It simply existed where it was, between stone and snow, between stillness and motion, between what has passed and what has not yet begun. The field above held its quiet. The sky dimmed by degrees so slight they could not be measured, and the weasel remained part of that slow, complete silence, unhurried, unannounced, unnoticed by winter, yet fully belonging to it. The light continued its long, subtle descent toward evening, though the sky did not darken so much as soften, the gray deepening into a muted tone that seemed to sink downward rather than fade. The weasel emerged once more from the stone hollows, its white fur untouched by dirt, its movement precise and unhurried, as though the world outside had waited for it without impatience. It crossed the snow in a small arc, leaving a delicate line of footprints that the wind immediately began to soften, though the wind itself was hardly present, just the faintest motion of cold air drifting in from the open field. The weasel's body was low to the ground, seamless, balanced, its muscles responding not to thought, but to the quiet language of winter living. It paused near a small ridge where the slope of the hill eased into the pasture, its nose lifted, whiskers quivering barely as it tested the air. The cold tasted of stone and frost, and the faint dry scent of dormant roots. Nothing new, nothing urgent. Beneath the snow, the vole moved again, but not toward the weasel, only through its own small world, in channels that kept it safe in most seasons. The presence of the vole was not a call, merely a fact. The weasel listened without needing to act. The day had taught it that time could stretch as far as it needed to, and hunger, when held gently, did not burn. The weasel remained still for a long moment, its small dark eyes wide and steady, not searching, simply seeing the way the world existed, the slow shifting of the sky, the faint sound of distant branches settling under their own weight, the whisper of something cold, moving high above where clouds drifted without direction. The world was not empty. It was full of quiet that did not ask to be broken. A crow called once from far across the pasture, a single note that hung in the air like a memory of sound rather than sound itself. The weasel's ears twitched toward it, but its body did not move. The crow fell silent again. The pasture returned to stillness. The stones behind the weasel held the day's cold deeply now, their surfaces faintly shining where frost had thickened with the changing temperature. The weasel turned back toward them, slipping once again into the narrow gap where rock and earth met. It did not disappear quickly. It melted into the space, its shape aligning itself with the dark curve of the stones, so that one moment it was visible, and the next it simply was not, without drama, without sound. Inside the hollows, the air was settled and unmoving. A single dry leaf, caught there since autumn, rested curled and thin against the ground. The weasel's breaths were small clouds that vanished almost before forming. It paused there, not sleeping, not waiting, just resting, because the body knows how to stop when no movement is needed. Outside, the pasture remained quiet. The field remained open. The farmhouse remained a distant presence behind snowfall that had not yet begun. The day continued to fade, but the fading was not a loss. It was simply a shift, like breath leaving the lungs so that another breath could someday come. The weasel blinked, slow, steady, without thought. Winter paid no notice, but the weasel, in the deep calm beneath the stones, belonged to winter completely. Toward evening, the light began to retreat in the same gradual, unannounced way it had come, thinning into a shade that was neither day nor night, only a soft gray presence that lay across the field and the stones and the hill like a thin layer of breath. The weasel emerged once more, slipping from the darkness between the rocks into the muted glow. Its fur, white and fine, seemed to merge with the snow, its small form visible only because of the quiet way it moved, not disturbing the world so much as passing through it. The air was colder now, colder in a way that did not bite, but simply settled deeper into everything it touched: stone, soil, fur, sky. The world did not respond. Winter does not respond. Winter is. The weasel lifted its head, scenting the air, though nothing in the wind offered new information. Beneath the snow, the vole moved again, slow and steady, in tunnels lined with grass that had once been green, but now was only memory. The weasel listened, and the listening was not planning, not calculation. It was simply awareness. Hunger was present, but hunger had not become sharp. The moment to act had not yet arrived. And so, no movement followed. The weasel breathed once, deep for its small body, exhaled, and continued along the base of the stones. The pasture beyond the hill remained still. No footsteps crossed it. No shadows shifted across it. The cow had moved earlier and now stood near the fence again, silent, its great body blending into the dimming shapes of the evening field. A crow settled onto the highest branch of a bare tree. Feathers puffed, head tucked slightly down, preparing for the slow slide of night. The farmhouse chimney no longer sent up smoke. The fire inside had settled into embers, unseen and unheard from where the weasel lived. A gate that sometimes creaked in wind remained motionless. The world had not stopped. It simply rested, everything moving so slowly that motion and stillness became nearly the same thing. The weasel slipped into a long curve of rock, body flowing like water through the narrow chamber beneath. The ground here held the memory of many winters. Old burrows collapsed and reclaimed by earth, roots that had grown and died and grown again, the faint scent of fox from some season long gone. The weasel found a shallow hollow, where stone arched just enough to form a small space of shelter, neither warm nor cold, simply protected from wind. It settled there, curling its body so that its tail lay lightly across its hind legs, its head resting near its paws. Its eyes did not close fully. Rest did not mean withdrawal. It simply meant stillness without effort. Outside, the sky continued to dim, though no sun could be seen setting. Darkness came the way winter always lets it come, softly, evenly, without urgency. The field grew quiet in a different way now, not because sound had left it, but because the light had changed the shape of listening. The weasel breathed. The vole beneath the snow breathed. The cow near the fence breathed. The crow in the tree breathed. The stones held the cold. The field held its stillness. And winter, vast and unconcerned, carried on without noticing any of it. Not because it was indifferent, but because winter does not measure by presence or absence. Winter simply is. The weasel lay silently beneath the stones, not waiting for anything, not thinking forward, not remembering back. It existed in the exact size of the moment it occupied, without needing to change it, and the field above remained open and untouched, the pasture and the stones and the quiet, forming a single unbroken breath, held, released, held again.